So, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that enterprises have about DLT or blockchain?
I'm not sure. I think one of the biggest misconceptions from generalists is that why don't enterprises just adopt blockchain as their tech stack? And I think like any other technology adoption within an enterprise, it's legacy systems that can't be overhauled overnight. It's going to take years likely and millions of dollars to do, and so they're probably not going to do it. It's going to be small test cases internally. I think there's probably over 100 major enterprises that have adopted blockchain internally, either through M&A or through R&D. So I think it's already being adopted by enterprise. I think they just don't talk about it, and they're still trying to figure out what the heck to do with it. In addition to supply chain, which I think is a great use case for the public blockchain, I think another is like who's going to get to using smart contracts for the consumer first when it comes to data ownership and deciding when to release your data kind of on a leasing based agreement. So like ideally for me, like that's kind of more of the future for enterprise and the consumers, that we own our own data and now we're leasing it out whenever we kind of decide based on the terms that we set.
Great point that it takes them a while to do things. There's companies out there that have purchased, say, PeopleSoft licenses or SAP licenses 20 years ago, and they're still trying to like implement them. They haven't figured them out. So to get something rolled out to an entire enterprise, it takes a very long time, like a generation.
Yep.
Yeah.
So misconceptions. What are these people think that isn't so?
Well, I guess for Facebook, like let's jump into Libra.
Let's do it. Let's
into
jump.
Libra. I mean, I think there's a broad range of blockchains out there, and some of them are permissioned and some of them are permissionless. And which side of the coin do you sit on, or do you support all of them? Well, with Facebook, it's a stable coin, and it's kind of like a traditional ETF system. And so, is it really blockchain? I mean, it's like not really, probably for most of us up here, probably not.
It doesn't have blocks or chains. So,
right.
Yeah,
Although there is node hosting, probably through AWS. And so it's like, I think the misconceptions, unfortunately, is, how much does the consumer need to know, and at what point is it just a buzzword to use just to get people excited and hyped?
I think a misconception is, my opinion is the need. What's even the point of these private blockchains, right? So for example, Microsoft, the software we sell, it's Dynamics 365 ERP system, so like Oracle or SAP, but just middle market. They moved to the cloud in 2016. It used to be hosted by the client. So, we would install it on their infrastructure, whatever. The cloud was a controversial move. It's starting to work out now. But I think as a consultant, in our practice, we're going to go to these enterprises. We're going to say, hey, buy these cloud servers from Microsoft that are hosted by Microsoft, not hosted by you. In addition, you already have SQL Server. You purchase SQL Server. Now go right to this other system, right? This other system that we also work with IBM to sell you. So integrate to that, right? To only work with X number of suppliers, right? To me, that's nonsensical, because if we had a public database that we could all use, much like we have a public internet that we can all read and write to, that makes much more sense, right? Because the value there is kind of unlimited, right? Whereas, okay, like Walmart, that example I gave earlier, that value added is limited to Walmart and its suppliers. What about everybody else, right? If everybody else uses a single database to read and write to, the value added there, the cost savings there is, we don't even know it because no one's really tried it yet.
So in like the traditional way that large companies think about making new changes, usually it's not how can we help those that aren't ourselves and our subsidiaries. It's how can we keep all the value in-house, and how can we not risk any of our private and confidential information or that of our customers from leaking out. And I imagine it's that attitude that will likely make the adoption of, let's say, public blockchains take a very long time. Yeah.
I think that's a big concern. I do think some of the concerns are just more fear-based than logic-based. So for example, we've heard about hacks with Marriott, Target, all these guys with credit cards over the years, right? We had to do an upgrade implementation simply because their web provider had credit cards hacked out of their database, right? That's the only reason we had to go in and do services. It was $250,000 project, right?
It's the same thing that happens in crypto, though. That's the exact same thing that happens. Like, that's how fraud happens. Sorry, keep going.
Okay.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, but their whole, and supposedly this was safe in their SQL server, which should have been encrypted, but it wasn't, right? Now, if I have the key or whatever, if I have some other way and I encrypt it on chain, or and it's secured by the mining and hash power, how is that different than me hosting encrypted data in my database, or if it's clear text, right? How is that different? You know what I mean? So I think it's getting over that hump. I also think the cost savings aspect. So you brought up a good point. That's not to add value for everybody, it's to add value for them. If the cost savings of using this is so overwhelming, you can't ignore it. All this crap about, oh, it's private, it's public, oh, it's unsafe. Okay, but I can save $1 million a year. Especially if I'm a retailer, that their margins are like 3 to 4%.
So how does the cost savings, in your view, of, let's say, a public blockchain or like a more permissioned ledger, how do those differ?
So we can even look at the private use case. So if I was an enterprise and I wanted to just exchange purchase orders with another company, today I usually have some middleman sitting in the middle that transforms that document. So let's say I write the purchase order and it's in some weird format, say CSV, right? But the other side only takes XML, just different file formats, right? I can't just send that document to them. I have to use this third party who I pay to change it and then send it to them. They bill me for support, right? I have to pay for this service. It's expensive, right? It adds up, especially if I have issues, especially when we come in. Okay.
Just for converting, I'm not in this world. I know how to convert a CSV file to XML without any cost, just going to a variety of URLs. Well, why does this cost so much, and why is that standard?
It costs you your time.
Yeah.
You got to have people doing it all the time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, or you could build it, but that's development costs of your internal people and support, right? You have to hire people to support it.
Okay.
Or you could just pay these guys and they take care of everything for you. Cut that out, right? If you cut that out and you start using the chain as the middleman, write one time, read many, right? Write once, have the other side just read it, you're done, right? Your support costs will reduce, they won't go away. They will be reduced, but it's clarity, right? It's there. It's in one place. You know where it is. Just go get it. You're done. We actually had a client say to my boss, they made the comment, what is the point of all these private blocks? How many of these things am I going to need? And then they brought up the case, okay, if you could take away from some of these third parties, that's value add.
So when you say public database, what do you mean by that? Is it immutable? Is it what are the properties of that?
Resistant.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is just Bitcoin at scale. So you can write any amount with Bitcoin original. You can write any amount of data to it. It is immutable because it's defended by the hash power of the miners. You can't roll it back unless you have 51%, that's a whole nother subject. You write it one time. No one can stop you. You just pay the fee, or you pay some service to do it, and that's it. You tell those guys, that's your address. I send it there. Go look at it. Go get the data. Bring it in.
So is this like any particular? This is like transactional data, right?
Yes.
So it's not all of the data that
No,
an
right.
organization owns. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is how two organizations might interact with each other, or two departments might interact with each other.
Yeah, that's the use case I'm talking about. Yep.
Any other no-brainer use cases for DLT and large enterprise?
Probably international payments, like remittance, but that's like an obvious one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the whole banking and Ripple and Libra and all of that. Yeah.
So, timely topic, Libra, Facebook coin. I have some specific questions, but anyone have any strong thoughts they want to lead with?
Well, it's they're not all they're claiming to be. From what I've seen, they're claiming to be a open network that anyone in the world can access, that the underbanked can access. But at the same time, they're saying that all of the nodes, anyone connecting to the network, has to follow KYC, AML, and money transmission compliance laws, which is impossible because 1.1 billion people don't have a government issued ID. a couple other billion don't have access to there's not proper addressing systems, and they can't actually do like proof of address. So I'm not sure how they're planning to do both following KYC AML laws and allowing the unbanked to access their network.
In terms, so you said before that the Facebook Libra is not a blockchain because there's no blocks and there's no chains. What would you describe the
it's a
Libra
version
project?
database.
A what?
A versioned
Okay.
database. Yeah.
Okay.
So they're just like, I mean, you could use MySQL for it, and they're just like, oh, the database hasn't been updated. Everybody knows. Everyone agrees.
As someone that's rarely using MySQL, would you agree with that characterization of Libra?
I still haven't read the whole white paper, but from snippets, and it does sound like it's just private servers that have money. I don't know if you guys have looked into it, but is the ledger even public? Can people even look at it?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
well, that's good.
It is public, which is a bit of an issue for all of Facebook's users that will potentially be using it, because then everybody will be able to see how much money they have, and I think it'll be a bit awkward.
Is it tied to
be
their
permission
name?
though, right? Like they're probably not going to release everything. It'll probably be highly permissioned.
It's an open ledger.
What
Which transactions will be on there though? Like what?
I presume any of the transactions that users use.
Is it tied to their name though, or is it just like
Their wallet?
the
It's
cryptos?
pseudonymous.
Okay,
Address,
yeah.
so.
I think my biggest or Ethereum Classic's proof of work. This is a proof of stake system, obviously, since it's like 100 people who are buying into play, so I guess like that's my biggest qualm with it is it's like kind of like a world order of 100 different organizations that can put in $10 million to start to kind of have voting rights. And with staking, you therefore hold your position, and no one else can come in and take your position unless you give it up. Versus mining's also very expensive, but anyone else can come and play if they want to. So,
right, yeah, it's the validators, the nodes, whatever you want to call them. It's not an open network. It's very much more like a proof of authority in that regard. It's a BFT consensus, so similar to Ripple's.
Do you feel that this will accelerate both DLT adoption with enterprise as well as DLT adoption amongst the average consumer, the Libra project?
If it solves any real problems, I think it will generate some adoption. I did see a comment on social media somewhere, I can't remember where, that we're really going to find out how many people are still using Facebook with this thing, because all the bots and all that, and Facebook is free, right? Or free. But yeah, I think with all the merchants they have, it could potentially add some value because it might streamline payments for some of these people. But if people believe, even if people believe it's a blockchain, that could be a step in the right direction just because more people are thinking about what's going on. But I do think in the end, people will see the flaws with this thing.
it is interesting though that I'm not a fan of this, but it is interesting as an experiment, as a social experiment, that a for-profit organization is going to create its own coin that's backed by other currencies, kind of like an ETF again, that a country like Venezuela, who doesn't want to have the government get involved, like as a citizen, I could then use the coin in theory.
Well, except, I mean, the problem there is that Venezuela is a U.S. sanctioned country. So if they're trying to be a compliant network, they can't let citizens of Venezuela use it.
Yeah.
Even though it's super useful for them.
So
maybe future talk, like future mesh networks, they would be able to get around it.
Well, but not with Libra then.
Not with Libra.
Not with Libra.
With any real cryptocurrency,
sure,
great. Like they can use it, right?
Yeah.
And this kind of gets to like blockchain just being this like word that you dump a bunch of different things into.
It already is.
Yeah, and perhaps a better phrasing of the question is not what Libra, the blockchain or not blockchain, will do for blockchain adoption, but what will Libra do specifically for non-governmental currencies and assets? because it seems more realistic to me that Libra will promote the idea that like, oh, I don't just have to use my country's native asset, or I don't have to just use, this US dollar if I can get my hands on it and pay a huge fee for. There's these other types of assets that are safe and that I can trust, that are backed by companies or by people as opposed to by governments. And that to me is what's the most exciting thing about Libra, regardless of if it's successful or not, but just the kind of a mindset shift of not just consumers, but influential business people and politicians that, you could, because if let's say they didn't want to be compliant and they really took like a move fast and break things approach and just kind of said F you to all the different central banks around the world of these developing countries, they could probably get adoption, at least for a short time, and become a top 20 currency in the world, top 10 currency in the world.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I do think that what they're doing is useful. It's not useful. It's way better than the current banking system. It's like banking 2.0 really. And yeah, I think it's kicking off currency wars. I expect to see a lot more like massive consortium blockchains. Notably absent from their partnership release is any corporations outside of the US and EU. So I'm expecting to see maybe some Asian conglomerates starting to create their own currencies, maybe small countries banding together, creating their own currencies. I'm already aware of Southeast Asian countries in talks about it. So yeah, I think we'll definitely see more of that Libra style currency coming out.
There's no Facebook in China, right?
No.
It's not, right?
No, it's banned.
So we're just going to exclude 1 billion people from using this so-called global currency, right? So that's the whole problem with the Libra, is that it's for a certain group of people, right? Versus everybody, that everyone can have access to, right? If we have a situation where we have everybody able to access something, use it, yes, not by just being given it, but ability to earn and transact with everybody else. That is a much better system than some system that someone created that only lets these guys, use it.
So it sounds like you're not a fan of private blockchains almost in any case.
No, not at all.
Does anyone else on the panel feel like there is a legitimate or valuable use case where a private blockchain might make more sense than a version database or a public blockchain?
Yeah, I think like a public blockchain is expensive, and writing a lot of data to it can be cost prohibitive and not always necessary. A lot of times there's just like, you have groups of people or organizations, maybe there's 30 or 100, and they all like somewhat trust each other, and they really just need the benefit of being able to verify transactions within each other. They don't need a full global consensus mechanism in order to transact efficiently. So yeah, I don't think I think there's like different use cases require different.
Isn't that kind of what Libra is doing in terms of? Yeah.
I think Libra is great for like all of the corporations that are involved in it. I think it's great for them. Yeah.
So, but you wouldn't call that a private blockchain. You'd call it a version. Oh, you would. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, it's technically not a blockchain. It's a private DLT. Yeah. If we're using blockchain in the just like everything as a blockchain,
like trustless.
Like, well, not in the distributed ledger technology. If we're using blockchain as synonymous, then yeah.
Yeah. Let's not use it as synonymous. Let's.
Okay. So it's a private DLT.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel about that, Josh? That use for organizations where they just want to kind of verify amongst already fairly trusted parties as opposed to wanting the ability to trust anyone. Mm-hmm. That kind of application of private DLT.
Well, yeah, in that case, you do have trust because you have trust among those people who control the chain, right? This subset of people. Yeah. With something like Bitcoin, there is no trust because you just trust their greed, right? All humans are greedy. It's our nature, right? In Bitcoin, the more greedy you are, the more money you can make. Because if you try to cheat the system, you get punished. But if you just try to make more money, you earn more money, right? So if you're paying a miner to put this data in the next block, he's going to take it. It's that simple. He doesn't know what that data is. He doesn't give a shit, right? He's just going to put it in and he's going to move on to the next block. So these other private ones, they're going to be scrutinized. Oh, what is this? Oh, we can't put this in there, right? The only way you have that is if everyone agrees with Bitcoin. Everyone agrees, like something like child porn or something like that. Okay, we're take this out. This isn't allowed. Or someone's trying to double spend. No, we're not doing that because I get punished if I try that.
Well, let's talk about child porn for a second. I didn't think that necessarily be a topic, but
Maybe abortion's a lighter one.
any taboo, like, so you're saying if everyone agree, I mean, there's very few things that I think every single node or miner will agree is taboo, and or even if it's agreed that it's not taboo, that is wrong, unethical, like, and even if that is agreed upon, it might not be great for the security of the network if there was like the pruning of that or the eliminating of that. Do you see that as a potential issue with public blockchains or with Bitcoin?
I do not, because if the miner prunes it, there's laws around this. That's fine, right? If you take something unknowingly and then you find out what it is, you just get rid of it. You didn't commit any crime, right? No one wants to hold that stuff on their computer because they know they would get in trouble if they found out, so they're going to get rid of it. Does that answer the question?
Well, I just mean like it seems to me like a little bit of like a slippery slope. He's like, okay, probably almost any person is going to agree that it's a better thing for this world if there's less child porn. But what about some things that are a little more controversial, like holding government documents and being kind of a dissident, where it's like perhaps minors in large parts of the world, it would be illegal for them to hold it, but perhaps there's large swaths of the world that want that data out there, and that how does, if it's not fully immutable, I see kind of a very slippery slope with a lot of the most important things that public distributed ledger technology can aid be taken off.
So in this scenario, is that we have something that's illegal in one country but being legal in another?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Getting it on there is not an issue. You just pay the fee and they'll put it in. That is a very slippery slope, like you mentioned, because can the government act on that and ban people from accessing it? Probably not. So I don't know. You might have a situation where you have U.S. miners prune, but Chinese miners keep it, and you just go to the Chinese website and access it. I don't know
what do you mean by prune?
So in Bitcoin, the miners don't have to store all this data if they don't want to. They just need the copies of the UTXOs.
Oh, you mean so they're not running the
full node
chain history? They're not running a full node then.
They can. They don't have to.
Right.
Yeah. But anyone can sync up a node, right? I mean, you're not doing anything, but anyone can sync it up and have the full blockchain. So anyone can get the data if they want it, and then they can prune as they see appropriate.
Yeah. So then that data is still on an immutable ledger, so it's still accessible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Including the child porn, including the stuff that everyone disagrees with. Yeah.
But if you're a service provider and you have that and you show it to somebody, you are in violation of a law.
But the UTXO, then you wouldn't be.
Well, yeah, you wouldn't be able to. Yeah, you would have to do something about that. Yeah.
There's also an evidence trail of who put it out.
Yes.
So you're disincentivized to place it on chain.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Lovely.
Okay, shifting gears. Programmable money and smart contracts. What new value does that unlock for large enterprises, and how?
Okay, so my boss, he's a director in our company. He has actually worked with some of this private stuff, and in my conversations with him about Bitcoin and the whole permission versus public thing, he totally understands the pointlessness of a private blockchain, because he gets that you would have these wall.
This is being recorded, right?
Yes. With a private blockchain, let's say I want to do the purchase order exchange, right? And then let's say I add the invoice, so I get my invoice from my vendor, right? Okay, now it's time to pay them. It's one thing to get the goods shipped, it's another to pay, right? With a private, like say IBM, I am incapable of actually paying that through a private blockchain. It will never be that. It will never be able to do that, ever, right? Even with Libra, if I had a Chinese vendor, can't use it, right? Bitcoin I can. So he was talking about, okay, I can close the loop, right? Purchase order, get the invoice back, payment, right? I can facilitate all that using one source of truth, right? So that's an area where things can be gained, is the programmable money, right? You have, your smart contract is kind of the ERP system or the system of record for each company, and the programmable money is the medium of exchange that you're using to facilitate these transactions.
Yeah, I mean, on Ethereum right now, the hot topic is DeFi, which stands for decentralized finance. And there's a lot of different projects creating different, basically financial products based on Ethereum. So you can get a loan in a stable token against Ethereum. You can get leverage. You can short. You can earn interest on a stable coin or on ETH. And people are building all these like financial primitives around, based on smart contracts around, and it's all called DeFi right now. The example I mentioned earlier with R3 Corda, where they're actually tokenizing debt between organizations and trading that around, creating these like private debt markets. I can see that trend continuing and merging, creating maybe permissioned or semi-public debt markets, because debt bonds, things like that, they're security. So for a corporation to publicly offer any financial instruments like that would be in violation of U.S. securities laws. So you actually can't have a public blockchain doing that sort of things in the U.S. because the issuer would be in violation. But in other regions, it could be a public blockchain. But yeah, I think the use case there is just having these publicly available financial products.
Okay. Private key management. What, if anything, needs to be solved here for greater enterprise adoption of both public and private DLT?
The idea that corporations are going to have backup phrases or secure their private keys, to me is absurd. That'll never happen. It's going to be like banks, like you have today. They're going to use a bank, or they're going to pay some service to keep their stuff, some custodial service to keep their stuff secure, have SLAs, all that sort of thing. They're not going to store, backup phrases in their data. That's not going to happen.
So the infrastructure that needs to be developed is not, better technology, better seed phrases and sharding of private keys. It's simply just businesses that are more established in doing that
are custodial, that are regulated, that have security around controlling this stuff, and they can be trusted. So it's going to be, we want a situation where I send an API request to some custodial, and then they facilitate my transaction, right? Now the difference is, with the banks, all the banking technology is old and terrible right now. But with something like that, that's something anyone can understand. You just make a simple request, okay, send my transaction.
Yeah, I agree. Like, for corporations, it's all about custody. The major thing there, we had like all these Bitcoin ETFs being considered by the SEC, and probably the most advanced one was the SolidX VanEck ETF, which was quite interesting. They got quite far with the SEC, and I expect that they'll likely be approved. The major blocker for them was two things. This was Bitcoin based, so they were worried about manipulation and the way that they're pricing the ETF. So if they were relying on a single exchange, like the Gemini ETF, that's highly manipulatable because the volume of it traded on the Gemini exchange compared to the market is pretty low. So the SolidX VanEck ETF was based on basically a index of not only the publicly traded exchanges, but also getting data from the private OTC desks where a lot of the Bitcoin trading volume happens. So that was something that helped push them along with the SEC. And then the other big part was custody, and in particular, insurance. Insurance is the major lacking thing in the space for regulators to approve it, for corporations to adopt it, for custody solutions to be safe. I think like that's really the key missing piece for a lot of this.
Any insights in particular on like how what the market opportunity is here for insurance companies and underwriting? And
I think insurance providers are naturally very risk averse, and they look for data to basically predict the future. So when they're underwriting something and evaluating risk, they're like, all right, what is the probability of this losing its funds? I think there's not enough data for them to actually accurately model that. And if they just take in all of the, say, custodial services ever, then you're including Mt. Gox in that. And you're including a lot of the big Bitcoin hacks that have happened due to poor security, of course. But those are the only data points that are available. Like, there's not that many data points available right now. So I think the risk versus premium trade-off isn't there for most underwriters.
Lloyd's of London and Aon. Lloyd's of London.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Are they underwriting now?
Yeah, Lloyd's of London and Aon both are the two big ones.
Oh, are they underwriting Bitcoin custody?
I think Lloyd's is backing Gemini.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I've always been surprised that there aren't more company kind of startups that take an AIG approach, which is just underwrite things that you don't necessarily really understand the risk to, and then just go out of business or get bailed out after you stop collecting the premiums.
I mean, it's interesting. Like, that's what you're talking about. That was an InsurTech at Plug and Play. So, like, I know all about the insurance world. So I think, I think that what you were talking about was, so R3 Concordia is like all the insurers of the world gathering together and supporting blockchain. And I think reinsurers are fascinating because what reinsurers do is they're essentially betting on somebody having a catastrophe and like backing it. It's kind of insane. Like, it's really a fintech play or finance play on risk.
So these are insurance companies.
Reinsurance.
So that they provide insurance for other insurance companies.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yep. So it's, I don't know, it's $1 trillion industry, literally, the insurance industry. So I think it's fascinating to have them come into blockchain and to actually underwrite. And I agree, there's not enough data for them to do it. That's literally, it's been told to me. So, it's really difficult to create models when it's not there yet.
You basically need to have somebody who's willing to do the research and take the risk on this to get like conservative returns, which is just like, it's a big mismatch there.
Well, a quick question for like the room. Who in the room holds crypto? Everybody? Who in the room would insure?
We have no crypto. What are you talking about?
Who in the room would insure their crypto or their wallet? I fucking totally would. Yeah. This is me and you are alone here. This is live. To remind ourselves.
For the right price. So I guess that's like true for most things.
To that point about them being risk averse and not having data, I think that's because we don't have any chain that's scaled yet. So there's just not enough data. But if you have a lot of transactions over time, and then with that comes stability in the price, because that's another risk, right? I mean, Bitcoin was 3,200.
Futures contracts.
Now it's 99,000, right? I mean, that is going to go the other way too, right? That's crazy. No one's going to hold on to something like that. The only way you get there is, use, high transaction volume, and scale. Then you get your data, you see the price stabilize. Okay, now I see an asset that I can insure, right? Gold is a good example of that, for example. You see something that's been tried and proved for thousands of years. Okay, I'll offer it to insure people. But something like Bitcoin, I mean, it could go to zero next year, right? Or it could go to 18,000. Who knows, right? What legitimate company is actually going to insure that? Because that risk there is way too huge.
So how does Lloyd's underwrite Gemini? Is it like just their hot wallet? Is it also
I think it's their custody. I think it's custody, but I think an interesting example of this is QuantStamp. Not to name drop any companies, but I do like them. But QuantStamp is doing an insurance play because they're giving a stamp of approval that the code is bug free and it's safe and secure. Their contracts are safe and secure, and they're looking to have insurance to back it to say that this contract is safe and secure. So I think that's actually a really interesting use case.
Yep, and that actually gets to a point you brought up earlier, which is, why doesn't somebody take the AIG model and just insure things that they don't understand? The reason for that is that in that situation, there's all these ratings agencies that, give advice about how secure something is without having any skin in the game. And then they just blindly follow that. So we really need...
We need a crypto rating agency.
We need one that builds up a good reputation, and more than one, actually.
Well, I mean,
Yep.
all the major financial institutions still follow Moody's and all of the ratings agencies that utterly, have proven themselves to not.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a skin in the game problem.
Yeah.
Like, clearly, there's a mismatch of incentives there, but it's how that works when you don't have time to research everything. Then you just follow others who say they did.
So we're going to ask one last question here and then open it up for audience panel discussion. So I'm a big fan personally of Peter Thiel, and one of my favorite questions of his is, what is one of your biggest kind of contrarian opinions, truth that most people think is not true about distributed ledger technology, and keeping with the topic of today, DLT and enterprise. So, share one, share two, but let's go around the panel and, your most contrarian opinions regarding DLT and enterprise.
Oh man, I'm not ready. I'm not no. Someone else go first.
I don't know, as it relates to DLT and enterprise, I would say that not enough people are focusing on emerging markets for enterprise blockchain. In a country like the United States, we have a very robust legal system. It's more robust than EOS. It's
That's not the contrarian opinion?
No, that's not it. That's just the obvious fact. The thing is, like, doing business here, if somebody screws you over, you take them to court. It's done. In emerging markets, if somebody screws you over, the contract is meaningless. Like, the person who wins in court is the person with the biggest pocketbook and the most influence. So if you want to do business in emerging markets as a business, a trustless system will be very, very valuable there. Compared to here, like the pain is just so much bigger over there. So I'm surprised that not more are looking to that market for their solutions.
I guess my roundabout answer is because I work directly with startups on the scouting and investing side, that startups would be more open to acquisition, which is happening a lot in the blockchain space. I think acquisition's like the key, is like one of the number one things that's happening, that big enterprises are just buying up teams. And I think because we're so early, it's okay. It's kind of a sellout answer. And that there's this big ideal and this big dream of like this peer-to-peer this governance, non-governance like dream that at the end of the day, I think we're just all going to get squashed by fucking Amazon and Google anyway. So it's like, I don't know. I think considering the acquisition by enterprise, I think for some startups it's okay. And that it's the first mover is not the advantage often. It's second and third mover, and it's those who have more money who can watch you fail and learn from your mistakes. And so I don't think it's bad what enterprise is doing. I think it's reality, and that we're all going to wait and see what happens.
Mine is that Bitcoin, as originally designed, is capable of doing everything that all these private blockchains, every other cryptocurrency is promising and more. And when it scales, it will basically replace the internet. We won't have the internet. We will have Bitcoin. You will be broadcasting Bitcoin transactions when you go to websites. You will be broadcasting Bitcoin when you send data, when you email. That's what's going to happen.
When do you predict this will happen?
It's going to take time, 20 years at least. The tech, in my opinion, is just, it's a combination of the internet and money. Because the problem with the internet now is it's free. But when you add money into that, now you have an incentive model where everyone can interact across the globe. Everyone can interact with each other. Everyone can transact. Everyone can communicate. And that type of system that scales, that is wonderful for everybody. It's basically capitalism unleashed. That's what I see happening. I've become convinced of that in the last 6 months. That's my I think that's a very contrarian opinion. But we'll see what happens.
Do we want capitalism unleashed?
Yes, we do.
We do? Oh my gosh.
That aside, how could Bitcoin scale to that sort of massive amount of data? If it's you're talking about it replacing the internet?
Yes.
That's like, I mean, you have to have multiple nodes and consensus for that, and we literally have a bunch of data centers that are the internet right now.
Right.
Which means we'd have to have, I don't know, at least 10 times more data centers than we have right now.
Yeah. So right now the internet's a mesh, right? Let's think about Google. What does Google do? I go to Google, I search something, they search all these other servers, and then they come and bring me back the results, right? That is super inefficient if you really think about it. Why can't I just go to one ledger, search, and then I get everything? And it's not censorable, and there's no crappy ads of stuff that's not related, right? And I get everything. Right? That is just more efficient. I mean, it's write once, read many, right? If I send an email to 3 people, I just replicated that file 3 times. Why? Write to it once. Now everyone just reads from that. If you need to update it, fine. Whatever, broadcast a new transaction. But now you have a source of truth and you have one file. It's data redundancy, right? And just imagine that many times over. That's where the cost savings comes in for like these businesses, right? I mean, database backups are a great example, right? I'm not saying a company's going to use their, the public ledger for the whole database, but if they did, right? Imagine how cheap that would be compared to what they're doing right now.
Yeah, well, what you're saying is that at scale, it's going to be so much more secure and cheap than
how
private.
Would that be cheaper, though? Like the cost of keeping many nodes in sync and having consensus that requires a lot more compute power than the current model does.
If people are transacting at scale, the miners are getting paid so much money, they're going to be reinvesting that into the system, building up their hardware, leveraging Moore's law, increasing their bandwidth. Moore's law is a thing, right?
But it's hitting in the top of the S curve.
It's going to keep going, right?
It's hitting the limits of physics. It's not going to keep going. It's Moore's law is an S curve. It's not an unlimitedly exponential curve.
To me, we don't know. That's how I see it. Is if we have these miners constantly building out their infrastructure, it's humans backing it who are motivated by profits. Who knows what they could accomplish, right? Who are we to say that they can't? Maybe they can. Maybe they can't, right? I guess we'll find out.
But I mean, from a first principles perspective, the fact that that's cheaper, it doesn't make any sense because you're needing to replicate this data across. I don't know how many nodes you're expecting in this, but right now there's thousands of miners on Bitcoin. More than that, I'm not sure.
I'm sure it's something like that.
When you're using Google Cloud servers, when you're using AWS, they're storing it on one machine and then replicating to some 2 or 3 other redundant machines. So the cost of that is very low because you're using relatively fewer resources.
So that cost would be deferred from these companies. Yes, it's expensive for the miners, but the miners are also not mining unless they're profitable. Otherwise, they wouldn't be miners, right?
Right.
But to the company using it, it is cheaper, right? Because you broadcast your transaction one time instead of doing all this other stuff where you got to keep control of your local database, constantly take backups, pay for all this bandwidth, hardware, whatever. The infrastructure is deferred to one place versus held privately.
So you're counting on the growth of the Bitcoin asset to offset the cost of running all this.
Pretty much.
I mean, if it stabilizes, as you say, then I'm not sure that the economics of that would work out.
If the transaction, it only succeeds if the transaction volume is extremely high. That's the only way it works. If that doesn't happen, then it'll fail. Because if that happens, then the miners will scale because they want to make money, right? If they see 400,000 transactions in a block, they're going to go after that block because they want to get paid, right? Like right now, we have this block subsidy system where it's fixed reward, right? That's going to go away, right? We're getting there, 2020, 2024, right? If you don't scale, your chain's going to die. It's that simple, right? You could move to a proof of stake system, but we already heard people don't really like that. So one that's capable of scaling can be the only one that wins because that's the only way the miners continue the network, right?
Okay, so that's interesting, but in order for that to work, you essentially need to have a bunch of massive data centers, and there's only so many people that can pull that off.
That's right.
So you might only have 3 to 10 miners on a network.
As long as you have 3 or more and they're in competition with each other, that's totally fine.
Yeah, but that actually looks a lot like private blockchain.
How?
Because for 3 very powerful people to collude with each other.
But why would they?
A lot of reasons. They're running the global financial system.
But if they get millions of transactions a day in fees, if they get all that per day, why would they attack their own system and mess all that up?
Have you seen the rest of the world? Like, that's what's happening right now.
What's the example?
The global financial crisis.
Yeah, but that's a completely separate system. That's people who are able to print money with
Debt. Yeah.
Yeah, they're able to print money without anyone knowing about it.
Yeah, it's a small group of individuals who figured out a very complex way within a very complex ecosystem to do something secretive.
Yes.
And take advantage of the trust that everyone is getting.
Right. That's not possible in Bitcoin unless you work and you build out your infrastructure and you mine, right? With that, you had a group of people who were staked and they took advantage of their position, printed a bunch of money, did all this fraud, right? With Bitcoin, you have a public ledger that everyone can see. No one's going to just increase the supply just, like they're at the club, right?
I'm not even, I'm thinking that, like, if everyone is, like, if corporations are transacting with each other, if bond markets are running on this, like, and you have 3 nodes, the ability for them to collude and change something in a way that nobody really understands is pretty high.
I don't see it playing out that way. I think that their greed and the volume of money they get every day, because if they do try that, the other two, if one tries it, the other two will push them out. And, if all 3 try to collude, okay, they destroy their own network. Now all that money they were making goes away every day.
I mean, this principle that having, a handful, less than 10 people in power colluding and making it appear like everything is okay is what runs emerging markets right now. That's what runs.
So one of the checks is the permissionless of the system for an outside competitor to enter in and kind of check any kind of cartel.
Right, but they would need a massive.
So I think it's the key is that the openness and the permissionlessness to enter the system is what kind of checks the collusion, as opposed to having a proof of stake. If nobody sells their stake, they can just like keep it in. Where the minute that someone tries to block transactions or whatever, another miner is going to swoop in and process those transactions. So,
but if the capabilities required to enter the system are only available to 10 organizations on Earth, then it's not really an open system.
No, technically it's an open system.
It's permissionless with a huge cost of entry.
Yes.
No, but if the capabilities are that ridiculously high, like you have to have an Amazon.
So we already have like an empirical example of that. So then we get Bitmain, right? And then everyone's like, oh, it's becoming.
Bitmain is peanuts compared to what he's talking about.
Well, I'm saying just theoretically, what happened was that there was a bunch of people preempting kind of a Bitmain takeover by changing the consensus mechanism of Bitcoin and removing power from the miners, saying the full nodes is what's gonna check the miners. But if you allow just the Bitcoin system to work and free market competition to work, then eventually a better competitor would have came along and checked Bitmain's power. And in Bitcoin's case, during the BCH hash war, it was CoinGeek and nChain who were competing with Bitcoin ABC to adopt their implementation. So basically, if you believe in free markets and you believe in capitalism, you believe that allowing for permissionless entry into a market will check any type of collusion or cartel.
Yeah, I agree, but by making the scale that he's talking about is so large that you literally need to have multiple AWS, Amazon warehouses running all of this, right? And the number of organizations that are able to do that are very, very few. And so if that's the system that you're working towards, then it's not an open system to run a node or run a miner on the network.
Because
technically it's
But
effectively it's not. Effectively it's not.
Versus quality of opportunity. So not literally everybody will be able to play. but you have the opportunity to play. The game is set in a way that if you out-innovate the competition and you're more agile as a startup and you invent some new miner, you can play the game and you can enter the game.
So the question is like that principle, like that's true for any type of market, but the higher the cost, even if the game is fixed, practically speaking, it makes competition less likely, right? Like if the barrier to entry to get into a market is $100 versus $1 billion, and in this system, it would be the equivalent of probably hundreds of billions of dollars, if not higher, even if it is like possible and completely open and immutable, the rules of how it works, there's still not going to be a lot of competition, right? Realistically.
So really, growth is somewhat unbounded. It's kind of just limited to our ability to acquire knowledge.
Yeah.
But also, I just thought about this, is that in order to introduce some type of like limiting system, like this limiting the size of the blockchain, that actually introduces centralization, right? So who's going to dictate the parameters in order to maintain decentralization, right? So then that actually introduces centralization, and that's kind of what happened to BTC, is that they were scared of Bitmain taking over the system. So you had somewhat kind of the developer group acting as a centralizing force to impose a arbitrary limit on the system, to where in the BCH system they kind of allowed the free market to work. And then eventually Bitmain was unseated by Nchain and CoinGeek, and I foresee in the future that eventually that there will be another competitor, maybe nation-state will get involved or whatever, that will unseat CoinGeek and so on and so forth, and evolution.
No, I think clearly no system of consensus is perfect and doesn't come without trade-offs, but I just think it's, as someone who is very much is for the big block scaling solution of Bitcoin, I still think it's important to be honest about the trade-offs, which is that like when you're talking about at like full scale in 15-20 years, there's not really like the type of meaningful competition there is in terms of competitors to Bitmain, right?
I don't necessarily agree.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily agree that we're kind of taking what exists today and extrapolating it forward, as opposed to assuming that we're going to continue to grow and continue.
Well, it's not about growing the tech. It's about just like the amount of like wealth and capital in the world. And like if you have all the transactions on a single network, or the vast majority of transactions in our world on a single network, it reaches a point where whether it's $1, $1 Bitcoin, whatever it is, a higher percentage of the value in the world will be needed to secure that network. So it's not so much about, even if we have unbounded growth in terms of what the technology can do, we can't have unbound growth in terms of like, we can't make 100% more than 100%.
So that's where the transaction fee plays a role, right? So let's say the miners are making $1 million a day, right?
Yeah.
If they're making $1 million a day in transaction fees, let's say it's just 5% of the Bitcoin supply, so about 1 million Bitcoin.
Okay.
Right? They're not going to just hold it, because if they held it for 21 days, their system would die, right? Yeah. They have to redirect. That is the role of miners in the system, is to not just take that money and hodl like the BTC miners do it, is to reinvest that back into the system and make the currency more valuable. That is what Nchain and CoinGeek have done, right? CoinGeek has actually had 51% of the hash power on several occasions, on BCH and BSV. They did not attack. Instead, they're funding startups, they're putting on conferences, they're investing into the system, because they know they're gonna make their currency that they mine every day more valuable, right? So they must do that. If they don't do this, the chain will die, like you were saying. You can't have 200%, right? You have to reinvest back into the network.
Yeah, I think now that for sure, I think that is clearly like there's a large economic incentive to reinvest and to not have cartel-like behavior because of still high, but relatively low barriers to entry. I'm talking about like at a scale in which we're not talking about, 10 million, 50 million, 100 million to get into the market. We're talking about like, 0.5% of the world's value that's stored in an asset, or 0.3. Like it's not about the technology. It's about like a growing percentage of the world's wealth needed to do that. And because it's as a percentage, it's not about the
It feels like you're saying though, I want to be the CEO of Apple, and there's only one, and like I'm mad that I can't be the CEO. There's a centralization of CEOs, and it's like that's like an equality of outcome argument, right? Like not everyone's going to be a CEO. You can try your best, and you're going to fail. But the cream will rise to the top in a free market. And like you could argue with literal CEOs, this isn't happening, so we don't really have a free market. It's like very crony capitalist. But in a system that does have a free market, like the cream will rise to the top, and you will have the opportunity to be a CEO.
What I'm trying to point out is I think there's a difference in like a free market in which, it costs $300 to make an LLC. You need a few million in capital to do what you need to do versus like still a completely free market, not arguing with that, but a free market where that initial cost is now, let's say.
You will probably fail, and it'll become more and more likely you'll probably fail at scale. But people at the top can't get lazy. They can't sit on the beach and sip margaritas. So it's just hyper competition, hyper capitalism.
So
there's no room, there's no margin. It's just
so there's hyper competition of within these few entities, and it's incredibly competitive. But there is a lot less competition for new entrants and
there will be like a really extreme Pareto distribution. It'll lead to the most efficient outcomes and the cheapest costs and the best network.
Yeah, like Pareto distribution and economies of scale is just like a fundamental fact of nature that we're not going to be able to transcend. And I just had this conversation with him that I think we're using the wrong kind of indicators or KPIs for kind of like freedom or permissionlessness. So I think people are looking at like decentralization as in like the number of nodes and how easy it is to run the node. Based on kind of my experience, I don't know, this is kind of a weird metaphor, but then I compare Bitcoin to like MMA. To where I notice that MMA is kind of like a permissionless system to where anybody with like hands and feet in the world can join. And I notice there's a lot of churn of the champions at the top. No one stays up there for too long because anybody can come, and there's these guys from this area called Dagestan, the Caucasus, that is telling war torn, and everybody over there is about to fight, and they're kind of kicking all the kind of Americans and Western people's butts. And I notice there's a bunch of churn at the top because there's permissions. Anybody can come and compete. And my thing is that I think that kind of indicator or KPI of permissionlessness and freedom is churn at the top. Mm-hmm. And what I'm noticing in Bitcoin is that there's a lot of early adopters that have kind of a proof of stake mentality that I was first and I'm here and I deserve to be here. And then the minute that a bigger competitor like Bitmain or somebody comes along and challenges the power of the old miners and it all started, right? So there were CPU miners and GPU miners, then FPGA, then ASICs, and then everybody was screaming centralization. And in reality, they weren't able to keep up with the increasing caliber of competition. And once they felt that they were getting obsoleted, then they made appeals to decentralization and to try to kind of limit parameters like the block size so everybody can easily join the network. But when you see what's happening with BTC and then BCH and then BSV, is that there's very quick churn, and it's like like Adam Back, and then it's like Roger Ver, and then it's like Calvin Ayre. The thing is that if you just allow the system to work, there's actually a lot of churn kind of like the top of the hierarchy, and I think that's helpful.
What I'm trying to get zeroing on is not whether that is going to likely to continue now, but it's like, will that level of churn and competition be possible at scale when the economic barriers to entry are just in terms of like percentage of wealth in the world, maybe like 1 million times higher, 10 million times higher than now?
When you're measuring it in the GDP of the world as a percentage, like that means that only nation states can compete, and maybe large corporations like Apple or Facebook, right?
So actually, I think nation states will eventually become the miners, or miners will be the nation states.
Right.
There will be a lot, instead of the United States or some superpower being in power for hundreds of years, there's going to be constant churn as who's at the top of the nation state or the superpower hierarchy, which will be good for humanity.
So we don't need blockchain for any of that to happen. That's how it works right now.
How so?
That's, I mean, we have superpowers coming to power all the time and falling. United States is a relatively new superpower. China is a rising superpower. Like the consolidation of power and the churn at the top with power is how the world already works. We don't need to digitize that. That's just the natural order of things. The beauty of decentralized technologies is that we can limit that consolidation of power. We can reduce it. We can smooth it out. We can make it slightly more equitable for everyone.
Yeah, I would disagree. I think the parameter that we're looking for is increasing the ability for other nation states to compete, as opposed to
They already can. They don't need a blockchain for that.
That and individuals to connect, right? We just brought up how, if you're in China, you can't do the same things you can do in the US. With a one ledger, you can, anyone in China can communicate and anyone in the US, and no one can stop it.
Well, it's not the system we have right now. The United States sanctions and uses like
Tariffs.
SWIFT to completely.
Because they're the top dog right now, so they get to set the consensus.
With Bitcoin, you won't, countries won't be able to be blacklisted or sanctioned from the global economic system. That will increase the kind of competitiveness and provisions. The nation-state competition.
The current system feels more like proof of stake, where the powerful countries stake their nukes, and it's like, I'm gonna be the top until someone innovates a better weapon, and there's not really any way for a Western country to enter that conversation. It's not very competitive. It feels.
Sure, but you're trading one centralization of power for another.
But one's fundamentally more competitive, I think, is the.
Yeah. So there will always be scales of centralization because per just respect of nature. But then it's the dynamism of the competition
at
that
scale
Bitcoin will enable.
At scale, hash power is actually just proof of stake.
No.
It's rapidly depreciating.
Yes.
Right, but
within a year,
at that scale, the ability to buy and manufacture computer equipment is based on the amount of capital and resources that you have, which is based on your ability to control armies, to inflict violence. It's based on your ability to deploy that capital and monetize, monopolize resources.
So hash power is a disintermediation of violence.
Not at that scale, it's not.
So that's basically the function of hash power is to costly signal your strength. So then Daniel Kravitz, he's a great thinker, and he says that basically in nature, what animals do in order to not get into fatal conflicts, bucks or deers or male deers getting into fatal battles over territory and mates, they signal with their antlers to kind of their strength, so they can test each other without getting into fatal conflicts. And basically, what you do with nukes is that you kind of signal like your strength, but then also what's happened with hash power, as you saw in the BTC, the BSV hash war, or BTC BSV hash war. Instead of Craig Ryder, Calvin like going over and like killing like Jihan Wu and Roger Ver to get their implementation adopted, they turned on hash power in order to fight for their implementation, which is a kind of a non-violent way to engage in a competition for power.
And you know why they didn't do that? Because they exist within a much more powerful ecosystem that would have prevented them
but then
with
also,
violence.
Human beings not engaging in violent conflicts is better off for the whole.
Right.
So instead of me,
and that's what nuclear bombs solve.
Killing you, I can just show it through a signal signal of strength.
I think you're right. At scale, it will be harder to compete. That feels true, but I don't think the steady state is a cartel of 3 miners.
Yeah, like not everybody should be able to have a nation state.
Well, if the reason for that is this is just based on what he was saying about a node basically running the entire internet, and the amount of resources required for that are so massive that the barrier to entry is ridiculously high, that there literally are only 3 organizations that could do that.
It's definitely harder than today. I think we would all agree. It'll be harder to compete. But I think that's a different thing than saying it won't be competitive, which I think you
I think it will be more. There will be scales. There will be centralization, but then the system will be orders of magnitude more competitive, more efficient.
I think we've probably had that discussion for long enough. So we're near the end of our time. Let's do a couple more questions.
I'm going to bring us way back down to earth here. Pulling us back into the realm of the actual. I'm just curious to hear your examples. We talked about Walmart using IBM. But any examples you guys can think of like really strong, effective implementations of blockchain, like actual use cases in enterprise today, and perhaps why?
I'm not a Starbucks fan, but Starbucks has used blockchain in two different instances. Like one is with Bakkt, so that's for payments, and then the second one is with supply chain. So with supply chain, it's like the bean or farmer to cup, and so that way they can know that the beans that they're purchasing are actually coming from the farm that they're saying that they're purchasing them from, versus somebody kind of mixing them from another farm, from another village, or from wherever. And it's a marketing campaign, and it's a proof of farm, I guess, and to better their payments to farmers. So Starbucks, DocuSign also. DocuSign. Who else? That's a big turn.
Novice question, building on that. What ensures that the endpoints are validated, in the sense that the information that this bean comes from this farmer is actually true?
For Starbucks, I'm not 100% sure, but the startup that we worked with by the name of Statwig, they are doing a system in supply chain where they work in the pharmaceutical space. And so 80% of pharmaceuticals come from India, and the team's from India. And so for them, it's about monitoring vaccines that move from place to place to place. And so they use sensor-based technology, so it's IoT data, to track where the vaccines are going, to make sure that when they get to the point of destination, that it hasn't expired. Because getting an expired vaccine is like pretty useless, and now you have like children and babies who are obviously not in a good place to get that. So I'm assuming it's similar.
But at the start of the
they have hardware. It's a small hardware device. It's a sensor-based solution. So I assume Starbucks is doing the same thing. I assume.
The farmer producer has to validate that is the start of the chain.
Yeah.
Where this plastic is used, and always have to that method.
I honestly, I don't know. I'm not sure how Starbucks is doing it. I don't know. I'm not sure how. I assume they're not. I don't know. I know that I know this is being done in LATAM when it comes to like money movements with women, like in tiendas in like Guatemala. So like I think people are being taught how to do it, but honestly, if they're actually like looking at records all the time, probably not, is my assumption. But I don't really know.
Most of the supply chain solutions I've seen rely on basically an audit trail of a whole series along the supply chain, and if something goes wrong, then they know who to blame. Is basically the way it works. So it's more of a stick, if you will, in that sense. Basically, they're just able to, in a tamper-proof way, track it all the way back to the farm that messed up.
But the farm itself, the farmer, he or she they don't have to actually understand how blockchain works or like how to.
No, you just scan a barcode and then there's a tamper. I don't know this particular solution, but most of the supply chain ones, there's just all around scanning barcodes or
pretty simple
devices and gathering a bunch of metadata.
To answer the question about the use cases, one scenario we commonly see is a company that does drop shipping, meaning they don't actually ship products themselves. They go through a vendor or multiple vendors. But the problem they have is keeping the numbers intact. So the purchase order number, right? If they broadcast that to the blockchain, there's no debate on what that purchase order number was. So now if you're pushing it to even two or more parties, maybe a vendor is drop shipping to another vendor, you just streamline that whole business process. Because now, people fat finger all this stuff. Even if they fat finger, you still have that reference, right? So they send it out, you wrote it one time, all these other guys can look at it. Okay, I know exactly what they ordered. I can fulfill it. My data's accurate.
I think two other good examples. One is EY. So EY acquired an accounting and tax company, a blockchain company. And then a second one is for the state of California for our blockchain consortium, I guess, or whatever it's called. We're looking at cannabis, and I don't know if everyone in the room already knows about this, but like for most marijuana growers, they're still dealing with cash because they're unbanked. So they're a great use case for why a digital asset makes sense or why smart contracts make sense, because it's really dangerous for them to move cash from place to place, millions of dollars in a truck.
Are there any examples of those?
Of what?
Of marijuana companies using
Blockchain?
Or
Yeah.
any assets?
I can't tell you off the top of my head. I wish I could. So my friend Brett Noyes, who runs Unbanked Ventures, who works out of ETC Labs, he just incubated a company that just got acquired, who's doing taxes and accounting for cannabis growers. They just got acquired though. So it was his last cohort. So I wish I could think of the name off the top of my head. And then Jake, who was formerly at Dispatch, which is no longer really around exactly, he's now at kind of a VC that's investing specifically in that space. So if anyone wants to talk after, happy to share contacts. Yeah.
Yeah, I think use cases, something that wasn't really mentioned. I mean, Tom, you guys like app services, but I think we're in the East Coast, there's a lot more finance. And so, for example, the ASX, the Australian Stock Exchange, they are trialing a technology done by DAH, which is Digital Asset Holdings, and so they're building kind of blockchain or DLT for like financial services stack. So for like a lot of times these big banks are still using 1990s or early 2000s technology. So part of the stack for any exchange is a lot of that is built with tech that doesn't allow everyone to be on the same page at the same time, and that's what blockchain allows you to do in a manner that you can exactly trust with counterparties. And right now in banks, we literally have people calling each other manually
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
to figure out what number of stock you own, and I'll have to, manually know that okay, you and I have the exact same account, and that's kind of what I think like these kind of services are trying to solve. Another group is Grammatics in London. There's like 30 different banks that signed on to their consortium to do I think interbank payments. So that's another huge thing. It's really just kind of part of the back office of finance of trying to get everything on the same page.
Yeah, the clearing process.
Yeah.
So I think on that note, we're gonna call it for the night. Thank you so much to our panelists here, Josh, Tom, Liz. Thank you for coming, supporting this discussion, some music. We do this almost every month, the Node New Economy series. Thanks, Eric and Node, for hosting us tonight. And let's stick around and hang out.